and I'm part of the policy and research team here at BEC, looking particularly at issues to do with the circular economy. In today's webinar, we will look at the role that building design plays in reducing waste in a high-density vertical city. Architects in New York City led the development of the Zero Waste Design Guidelines for new and existing buildings to help the city reduce waste. Now leaders in a sustainable design from Hong Kong, Singapore, and New York City are collaborating to share design strategies, case studies, and policy suggestions that can help high-density cities reach zero waste goals. By joining us today, you're also becoming part of this very important conversation. Before we begin, I would like to thank the Center for Zero Waste Design for partnering up with us on this crucial topic, as well as the Design Trust for their support through the Design Trust Feature Grant as part of their Zero Waste Design Guidelines for High-Density Cities research. I would also like to thank Conrad Adena Stiftung for sponsoring BEC's project on this. Additionally, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our 8 supporting organizations, which includes the American Institute of Architects Hong Kong chapter, the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, Hong Kong Green Building Council Limited, Hong Kong Waste Management Association, the Institute for Sustainable Urbanism, the Royal Institute of British Architects in Hong Kong, Sustain Hong Kong, and the British Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. For our first item of the day, I'm delighted to invite Ms Clare Miflin, the founder of the Center for Zero Waste Design, who is joining us from New York City to give us an introduction on zero waste design guidelines and how it can help facilitate designers and architects to achieve zero waste in buildings and communities. Clare is an architect and systems thinker with experience in designing buildings to the highest environmental standards. At KISS plus Cathcart Architects, she helped develop their concept of productive architecture, which provides human, ecological, and economic benefits by integrating systems, which ranges from solar panels to hydroponics into architecture. She also led the development of the American Institute of Architects New York Zero Waste Design Guidelines through a multidisciplinary collaborative process. Additionally, Clare is also the founder of Think Woven, a consultancy that helps develop strategies to weave urban systems into ecosystems. On top of that, Clare is also the co-chair of the Committee on the Environment under the American Institute of Architects New York, a board member of Biomimicry in New York City, a member of New York City's Living Building Collaborative, and the sustainability coordinator for a local food cooperative. And with that, let's not delay any further. Please join me in welcoming Clare. Clare, please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, and it's so great to be here. Can you see my slides okay?
Can you share screen now? You can't see this.
You cannot see them? I did hit share screen. Okay, let me try one more time. Is that better?
Yes, all right, thank you. Please continue.
Great. So the Zero Waste Design Guidelines were developed through the American Institute of Architects in the New York City chapter to really answer the question, like, how can architects and urban designers support city zero waste goals? I was an architect myself and was looking to see how I could do a better job with my buildings. And I was looking at New York City goals and policies, which had just stated a zero waste by 2030 goal, which I have to admit we're not on track for, but they had several measures, a save as you throw, which is like a pay as you throw, volume-based pricing. They were looking to divert additional materials like organic and food waste, textiles and e-waste, which they were scaling up to become mandatory. It's currently mandatory for large commercial food waste generators to separate food waste. And they were looking to tie this into all their other climate reduction goals. So we really started by looking at the context. What is the waste stream in New York City and where does it go? And this Sankey diagram shows for residential and institutional waste in New York City, we only managed to separate about 50% of our traditional recycling, paper and cardboard in one stream, metal, glass and plastic in another. But organic waste, primarily food waste and some yard waste, you can see we only separate a tiny fraction of it, and most of it goes to landfill, where it gives off methane, which is up to 80% worse than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. But we could compost or anaerobically digest it locally. And a large part of the reason it's tough to do that is because of how buildings are set up, that it's not easy to separate organic waste. So we started by looking at how waste was managed in buildings by visiting many buildings and following the path of waste from where it is set out to where it's collected, and talking to the people who manage the waste and asking them how better design could make their work easier. We developed these different typologies for the built environment context that show, like, for example, in number 1, people take their waste straight out to the street, whereas in number 4, there's a big shared waste room. So in a large commercial building, different waste streams can be tracked. There can be equipment in there to make it easier to handle waste, to reduce the volume of waste, and you're much likely to get higher waste diversion. And then we shared what we'd researched and our ideas for best practice strategies in these multidisciplinary workshops. These were held at the AIA's Center for Architecture, and we invited people from different city agencies, from the people who pick up waste and waste haulers, from janitorial staff, city planning, Department of Transport, architects, developers, consultants. And this really, not only did it get people really enthusiastic and excited about the possibility of what the guidelines could do, but it really helped us fine-tune our strategies and make sure they were comprehensive and would work for all stakeholders. So what are the zero waste design guidelines? You can download them as a PDF from zerowastedesign.org, and they are a real comprehensive resource. We didn't find anything like this elsewhere. So I really think they are the first of their kind that really helps architects and developers figure out how to help cities get to zero waste. So although the context is very New York City centric, the strategies are really applicable anywhere. And they cover building design and reducing operational waste, as well as construction and demolition waste, and then strategies for things that can be done at a district and urban scale. They have case studies from all over the world, and then suggested policy and implementation recommendations. So just starting with construction materials, because that's really what most architects think about when they think about reducing waste. We categorize the 3 ways waste can be reduced. One is by kind of optimizing the materials you use, reducing the amount of materials, having salvage materials. Next bucket is kind of selecting materials that can always be circular, that are healthy, non-toxic, and can be recycled or reused again and again. And then lastly, managing construction. So you create less construction waste on site, and you less demolition waste if there's an existing building to be demolished. So the first is really maximizing use of space, multiple uses in flexible space. So you have a smaller building, optimizing structural systems, reducing the amount of finishes. And then things like prefab can reduce the amount of waste generated during construction, as can many other strategies that you can work with the contractor to do. Looking kind of circular economy principles looks at the future waste that will be generated when your building is remodeled, for example. So all buildings need to be designed to be disassembled in the circular economy. So that involves a lot of things. Like in the top right is Arup Circular Building in London, where they did a model building where every single panel in the building had an RFID tag, and it could be disassembled and it was tied into the BIM model. And then the developer can have a material information in a database so it knows what materials are in this building. Another one on bottom left is the idea that you can have a service rather than ownership. So say Philips provide lighting and it's rented by the airport every month, and then Philips swap them out when necessary and take them back when they're no longer needed. Circular material selection refers to reuse of buildings themselves and also materials that have recycled content and are recyclable at their end of life. And then construction and demolition waste, separating it on site, especially on the right for gypsum board, which we use a lot of in the US, that will disintegrate in a dumpster, but if you separate it from other materials, it can be perpetually recycled into new gypsum board. And then, of course, things like bricks and lumber, there's quite a market for because they are quite valuable. Next, I'm going to talk about how we as architects can design to reduce operational waste. And these strategies are within 4 categories again. How to design so we consume fewer materials and throw less waste away. How to ensure that we separate waste better. How to plan for waste to be moved efficiently through a building. And then that it kind of includes reducing the volume of waste to make it both easier to manage, but also fewer trucks will be coming to your building. So firstly, reducing food waste. That is the biggest one in terms of reducing costs for the owner and reducing greenhouse gases. So if you have buffets or food displays, the size of those trays and buffets makes a difference. If they're smaller, less will be thrown away. And then if you use washable plates rather than disposable plates, you'll have less waste. Often we hear in New York City that, oh, the real estate's too expensive for me to put in a dishwashing room. Well, this strategy on the right is actually Foster's Hearst Tower, where they put in a 3-story narrow slot that had a dish carousel, taking those dishes down from the mezzanine level down to the cellar, where the real estate was cheaper and they could have a dishwashing room. Another strategy is providing space for food donations, because if there's excess food, it's great to make sure you can keep it cool so it can be donated to someone who does need it. And then incorporating tracking. We all know that sub-metering for electricity makes your tenants use less electricity. It's the same for waste. So if you can have, like in the bottom right, this central tracking where all waste is weighed and there's incentives passed back to the tenants in this large commercial building, it's going to encourage them to create less waste. And then on the top right, it's just there's a lot of stuff that can be done back of house in the kitchen, which will mean that the chef knows what's getting wasted and then they can order more accurately. And these save the most amount of money for sure. Next is kind of how to better separate waste. First here, one of the key principles is equal convenience disposal, or is also called co-location of all streams. So you can leave all waste streams in one place. So that might mean on the top right here in Paris, they're throwing away all waste streams into pneumatic tubes as they leave the building. Or it could mean, like Centre Bottom, that within your apartment, you don't have a trash bin and then have to find some space for recycling, but you have bins for all streams. We also talk about design for occupancy, thinking what special waste streams are produced in certain locations. Like in a laundry room, it's a great place to have a textile waste bin, because that's where people will often be throwing away textiles, and we encourage those in residential buildings in the city. And so really looking at those residential building typologies, these are the ones we had in New York City, and they range from bringing all your waste down to a central space in number 1 to number 3, which is a chute, and then for trash, and you bring your recycling to a central location. And actually all of these typologies, apart from 3, show equal convenience for recycling and trash. 3, as it's so much more convenient to throw away trash, unless you care, you won't bother recycling. And so we looked at these, and per code in New York City, you have to have 4, 5, or 6. So it has to be equal convenience, but not for organic waste. When you add organic waste to the mix, it makes it more difficult, because you can have a central waste station, and that's easy to add organics to, like this in the top left. or in the bottom left in Paris, organics can be in one of those pneumatics. But if you have a small waste room, you're probably not going to fit in an organic waste bin. And even if you do, like on the bottom right, you will have to service it a lot. So if you want to keep equal convenience for all streams, it probably often makes sense to go to a central waste stream. And then you can add even more waste streams as it makes sense for your building. Similarly, in commercial spaces, equal convenience means not having those desk bins, which everybody throws every type of waste in, but having central waste stations. In planning for the next strategies, which are thinking of waste as a material flow through your building, we discovered that there was no real good resource for architects to use. So we developed a waste calculator to estimate quantities of waste. And this is the online calculator. I can show you it quickly here. If we try a waste calculator, say it's a residential building. We put in the number of units and the occupancy per unit, and then we get the required storage depending on what containers we're using, and we can change that. We can also, these are the average recycling capture rates, and we can change that if we think our building is going to do better because maybe we have equal convenience for all streams and we're educating our tenants. We can change that, and we'll see how the storage area changes. But most helpful for architects is that it suggests what kind of equipment you could use to reduce the volume of waste. So here we see if we bale our cardboard, it goes down, or if we compact our trash, the area goes down, which is very useful if you're planning a new building and are not sure quite how much waste to expect. So really considering a waste management plan for your building starts by figuring out how much waste you have, either from that calculator, or if it's an existing building, you could do an audit, and then planning for where the waste is collected, how it's moved, working with the staff and standard operating procedures or tenant guidelines you give for your tenants, figuring out that there's enough space to keep waste separated in storage areas that are large enough for the facilities managers, and then figuring out how it's collected. Reducing the volume of waste, as we just saw, is so important. On the top right, this surplus area wasn't needed once they included these balers to reduce the volume. And then equipment to treat organic waste. There's so many different types of equipment and so many different options that we're trying to kind of look at giving further guidance for architects, because it makes a difference if your waste is going in a pipe into a holding tank and picked up by a truck, or if it's going to be composted in site, or you're just going to dewater it and it's going to be collected still, but it's less smelly. There's so many different options, and some have positive reuse and some don't. So we're developing guidance on that now. And then we have infographics that really show all the strategies, like this one for food service spaces. Say you're an architect, you're designing a restaurant. What are all the things you can do? And so this infographic really gives you a whole overview of everything. And then you can check each of them, like 5 is a dishwasher, or 6 is accommodate cooking oil collection. And then you can find more information about each one. This here is the Mart, Chicago's largest commercial building, and it has a large central storage room for waste. And so it can track all the waste that comes through it, incentivizing tenants to recycle better. And also it provides tilt tippers and washing facilities for the totes, so that really making facilities staff job easier. We also just presented with someone from San Francisco Airport with the AIA San Francisco, and Gensler had done a study because they were getting like 25% diversion in their waste bins, and they wanted to have this zero waste plan. So Gensler took a look, and they figured that the bins were often mismatched, the messaging wasn't consistent. They looked at all the different gates. Some gates you could dispose of trash, others composting. This is for the facility staff. So it was difficult, even when the facility staff had separated waste, finding a place to store it, and the stuff that had been separated then got unseparated. So they did a comprehensive design and behavior study. They designed new bins and got the diversion rate up over 50%. They banned plastic water bottles and single-use plastic containers. You have to have reusable or these aluminum bottles, which are obviously recyclable. They have a lot of water hydration stations. And then they did these guidelines about where the new bins should be placed, how they should be placed, made sure they were seen from every waiting area. And this has really helped them get towards zero waste. And now they're designing a new concourse where they're really where they intend to have all reusable food serviceware. And they will have guidelines and incentives for the tenants to follow. This one's a residential building design strategy, similar to the food service. It has all the things you consider for a residential building in terms of best practice strategies. And then we have extensive case studies. This one's for Etsy headquarters. It just won the AIA Top 10 Code Award. It was designed for zero waste, and it has achieved true zero waste certification, which means over 90% of its waste is diverted. It only has these waste stations highlighted in red. There's no desk bins at all. And they are behind these pantries, which have all reusable dishes. They have coffee and drinks on taps. If you go out for coffee in the neighborhood, you can take a reusable cup with a plastic lid and bring it back. And they have this waste station that shows how to recycle waste really easily. The large bin is for compostables, and they have the diversion rate displayed on the left of the waste station. So you're really incentivized to know. Like last week, we diverted 86.6% of our waste. And so it kind of incentivizes you to do a good job. They also collect other streams like plastic film, and they make it easy to deal with the reusables. And the procedure for collecting the waste is that the staff have this hamper which has a scale on it, and they just tap what type of waste it is, and then the software automatically says the diversion rate. We also look at the collection and urban design context. I'm sure many of you have been to New York City and have seen the huge piles of waste bags we have on our streets, and it's a real impact on public space. And we found it to be even more so during COVID, when people are wanting to use our public spaces so much more. So we look at what are the strategies to get these trash bags off the street, whether that might be having pneumatic tubes. And some cities in Europe especially have retrofitted old towns with pneumatic tubes, where you bring your waste to a station in the side of the wall or in a building or on the street, and it's whisked away by the tube to these large roll-off containers. Or it could just be a submerged container in the street that's shared by a block or two. And like the ones in the bottom right here, that's actually in Holland, where they were having a problem with bags on the sidewalk and seagulls opening them. We tend to have rats in New York City, but a similar problem. And so they retrofitted their streets with these submerged bins for trash and recycling on every block. You can see in the plan in the top left. And then looking at neighborhood scale collection of other streams on the bottom left, that is in Spain, where they have these pop-ups in neighborhood parks that collect less common waste streams like textiles or batteries or paint. There was a proposal here in New York City that we could retrofit pneumatic tubes under the High Line Park, which is a linear train, old disused rail line. And through that, all that pink shaded area of the west side of Manhattan could bring their waste and load it up into the pneumatic tubes, and it could go straight to rail at the Hudson Yards. And the organics could go to an anaerobic digester on the roof of one of the Chelsea Market buildings in the bottom there. And that would be a similar thing that's being done in Battery Park City, which is alongside the World Trade site. When that began being redeveloped, there was a lot of construction, which caused a lot of rats to come out. And they decided that in the newer buildings, they would require them to have a shared compactor, and all the staff bring the trash to these shared compactors so they have no trash on the street. They also bring organic waste to these central composters, which take landscape waste and food waste so they can produce better compost, and they use it all on site. And that's something we're looking at and seeing more and more in the city. For example, Domino Park, which is a large reuse project of the old Domino sugar factory by shop architects. Here you can see it in the top left. They actually have this small rocket in vessel composter, used to take waste from small cafes, but since COVID and the city suspending its residential organic waste program, people can drop off their food scraps as well. And in 2 weeks, it actually converts it into compost, which can be reused. And most of it is reused in the landscaping of the 3-acre site. So just to kind of sum up, the AIA really supported the work in many ways. They had a large exhibition during the National Convention in 2018. They organized a zero waste challenge, so architects and design offices could apply the best practice strategies to their own offices and measure their effectiveness. And then the city sponsored through the AIA education and project assistance. So us going out to architects' offices, giving a 1-hour presentation on the zero waste design guidelines, as well as giving project-specific information for certain projects. And we got a lot of publicity within the architectural press and general press. And we're looking to make sure that New York City agencies and public buildings follow the guidelines. NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, is one of the first. It's done its own version of the calculator, and it's working on central waste stations. We're looking at pushing containerized waste on the street. The Department of Transportation and Sanitation are working on that and put out a request for design ideas. We gave some design ideas for this, whether on the top left, this was kind of a caddy system where you can drop off organics on your way out to the subway and then pick up a caddy on your way back and don't have to worry about washing them, or kind of parklet type central waste stations in the parking lane, or maybe under elevated infrastructure, larger scale ones. And then we've set up a Center for Zero Waste Design to help us advocate for implementation in New York City, to develop more pilots and research. I've been working with the AIA Framework for Design Excellence to make sure designing for zero waste is part of the AIA framework, also with USGBC to get it into LEED standards, and then adapting to other cities. So this project with Hong Kong and Singapore, with 3 high density cities, seeing what we could learn from each other. Also looking at working with the AIA in San Francisco and the Bay Area to adapt them to them, and case studies all over. And so that's actually my last slide. I think I've managed to stay within time. And sorry, I guess I should stop the share now.
Thank you, Claire, for your presentation. There's a lot of information, a lot of insight, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from Hong Kong. So, Claire, please stay with us for the next hour for the panel discussion. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you from the audience. And now, my name is Simon Ng. I'm moderator of the panel discussion. Joining me at DEC, I have Fiona Sykes, Associate of Arup. Welcome, Fiona. And we have Dr. Perry Chan of the Hong Kong Green Building Council. Thank you and good morning, Perry. And to the right of Perry, we have Jackie Look, Associate Principal of Contact Fox Hong Kong. Welcome, Jackie, and good morning. And also joining us from online, we have Dr. Amy Lai, Senior Sustainable Development Manager of Swire Properties Limited. Good morning, Amy. Can you hear us? You have to unmute your mic. Yes.
Hi, good morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. And we also have Mr. M.K. Leung, Director of Sustainable Design of Ronald and Partners. Good morning, M.K.
Morning, can you hear me?
Yes, very clear. Thank you. Okay, now to kickstart the panel discussion, I want to remind our audience, if you have questions for the panelists and the speakers, or if you have any comments to share, please type into the Q&A box. And we will take care of your questions and share that with the panel later on. But to start the panel, I'd like to take a step back and ask a question actually about the current main waste management challenges. So maybe I would like to direct the question to Amy and Fiona. Maybe I'll start with Fiona since she is sitting next to me. Fiona, what are the main waste management challenges in different types of buildings in Hong Kong? And how much are these challenges down to building design? So what's your thoughts, Fiona?
Okay, no problem. Well, I'd say that some of the main challenges are the quantity, the separation ability, and of course the space and the cost. In Hong Kong, land cost is even more expensive than New York. And like you said, in New York, sometimes the waste management wasn't always included in the original design. Currently, there's a requirement for new buildings to have a 1.5 metre waste room on each floor with some separation. Organics is also going to be quite challenging, particularly with the heat and the pest issues and hygiene concerns. So I think those are some of the main issues we have. Also, the need for really holistic systems thinking for the going through from the building design, from the collection, from how we retrofit the existing buildings or what might be suitable for existing buildings to the different collection streams. There's many different contracts for collection and how that really flows through to the different facilities. Of course, with our recycling, like the US, we used to export most of it. Since the beginning of 2018, we've obviously had to manage in a slightly different way, and we're seeing increasing pre-treatment or treatment facilities in Hong Kong, such as the New Life Plastics and the Tetra Pak facility, which is quite good. And I think the other issue is that at the moment, waste is paid for as a service by building facilities management operators, but recycling isn't always. So what's actually recycled or taken away is very much dependent on what the daily price is, or whether the cleaners themselves want to choose to separate those materials and take them away. But we're very lucky in that we're quite a small place, so transport distances are quite small, and things being so close together does mean you can collect things together. So I think we should not only look at the problems, but what our opportunities are in Hong Kong too.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Certainly, we will discuss opportunities later on in this panel discussion. But maybe, switching to Amy. Amy, based on your experience, given Swire Properties portfolio, and probably you are managing and developing different types of buildings. So do you agree with Fiona in terms of the challenges that you are facing as well, or do you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Simon. And I think speaking for commercial and residential buildings, challenges in our experience could be categorized into four main areas along a building life cycle, including space constraint, occupants' behaviors, waste management technology, and downstream recyclers. For Hong Kong, I think space is such a premium, but collection, handling, storage of general waste and recyclables require space. And so space planning for waste management is, we often observe inadequate, which means that more planning and coordination need to be keep recyclables separate on site. And on occupants' behaviors, over 90% of waste managed and our portfolios come from building users. So recycling education, we observe on proper recycling didn't get really penetrate into building occupants' minds, and so building occupants, may lack of enthusiasm in recycling, and also on waste management technologies. Space definitely is needed for on-site waste treatment facilities such as paper compactor, on-site food composter, or some waste treatment machine compactor, things like that. But there are uncertain payback period of such smart waste technology, and it's usually quite costly. But we have not yet have the waste charging scheme implemented in Hong Kong. So like for us, we would like to influence our tenants and in their behavior and reduce waste generation. But it has not been easy because the waste technology, although it's available, but we also need to complement with tailored strategies of communication to drive tenants' behavioral change. And then on downstream recyclers, there's also concern of lack of credibility, as news revealed that some collected recyclables were delivered to landfill instead of recycling facilities, which really strike a serious blow to public's confidence towards the recycling system in Hong Kong. So, making the building users less motivated to recycle. I think that's some of the challenges that we observe.
Okay, thank you, Amy. You touches on quite a few things, including space planning. We talk about tenants' behavior and how we can work with tenants to educate them. We talk about technology and investment and payback, and also downstream recyclers and their credibility and how they are dealing with the recyclables. I think we'll try to discuss these topics one by one, but maybe let's focus first on space planning. And I would like to bring MK and Jackie into the conversation. Now, from the architect's point of view, at the beginning of that planning cycle, would you agree in Hong Kong, for example, more and more architects are now taking a zero waste design approach in project development? Is it the case or is it not? If not, then why? Maybe I'll start with Jackie and then I'll ask MK to comment as well. Jackie, please.
I have to say, unfortunately, it's kind of uncommon for architects to consider zero waste design in the space planning. And mostly for developer, they would like to get certification, green certification such as LEED and BEAM Pro, and maybe waste reduction. Zero waste design is part of the certification, but which is not a big part of it. There are a lot of ways to measures within the certification to reduce waste, but it's only a small part. And in terms of how we can do better, I think if there, at the moment, the incentive for the developer to reduce waste is very little. And it seems that recycled material is not part of the typical municipal waste collection. And so it's easier for the owners to combine all the garbages together. And really the truth is, without a municipal waste charging, there's very little incentive for the developer to do further. And I think another reason is also the general public awareness of waste separation. So this becomes very hard to execute. So just as what Amy just mentioned earlier, which I totally agree. And I think ultimately we need to start from the source to produce less waste and provide less disposable product to the consumer. So in turn, reducing waste.
Jackie, now what about outside Hong Kong? Do you recognize there are different kind of approach when it comes to waste management or consideration in the building design stage? And why do you think other cities or countries are taking, or architects in those countries are taking that approach?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because although I'm not sure what the policies are, for example, in China of waste collection, but I'm starting to see in the land purchase agreement of many of the developer in China, they are mandatory to provide 100% waste separation. So this is written in the land purchase agreement. So this is kind of interesting to me also to notice this.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. And MK, please unmute yourself. Do you agree with Jackie, and what's your observation in Hong Kong and outside Hong Kong?
Well, in general, I agree with Jackie, but I would like to highlight a few challenges we have. First of all, I think waste management has not, been given the deserved attention we need. I don't think it primarily it is because of education. Well, I guess in a civilized society like Hong Kong, we know about this issue, but we don't find the value in waste management. And I think if you have the money, even if the waste charging scheme is implemented, if you have the money, you throw and you just pay. And I think if you are of a certain, if you are relatively well off, you can still be a big waster. And I think we need to come up with a system that can truly introduce values in waste management. This is something we need to put our heads together. For the space confinement in Hong Kong, it is a real issue. It takes architects and building professionals a bit more, I guess, creativity to find especially solutions that work in our vertical city. We have a compact footprint. Well, the good news is if we have chutes that is disregarded from the gross floor area, but the chute is not disregarded from site coverage, meaning in a confined footprint like Hong Kong, we don't want the buildings to be, the building bulk to be large, and we want to put the building bulk for something, especially for developer that can sell. For chutes, I don't think that is the case. So that is, probably we need to find a solutions that is, having an optimized or minimal footprint, probably consider certain stacking up, if possible, that can still facilitate waste management and sorting. And also, last but not the least, I think the infrastructure can do better. We have heard Claire has shared about the pneumatic systems, the automated waste collection systems on the public pavement. In Hong Kong, this is still unimaginable. And I think we have parks, we have pavements, but can we integrate some of these infrastructure which works with buildings, which runs on public roads underneath, and something we can manage all together as a shared facilities? These are something we can thought about.
Okay, thank you, MK. I just want to chat with our panelists whether you have any comments to add to MK's and Jackie's point. Maybe Carrie, do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah. Now, if I think about what is missing in Hong Kong, now if I try to compare net zero carbon, which is a hot topic now, from net zero waste, now both seems to be rather enforceable for a compact high-rise city like Hong Kong. The difference is climate change is a global issue of international pressure driving all the countries and cities to make every effort to go for zero carbon. And Hong Kong is now committed, our country is committed as well. But waste is a separate issue. Waste is, on the other hand, a local issue. So one thing missing is the driving force at an international level. So therefore, Hong Kong lacks a long-term ambitious target like net zero waste. And the policies that the government is going for is based on what the society can accept, can happily accept. And even though if you go for net zero waste, but you do not yet have a mature recycling facilities to cater for all the recycled materials that can be turned into resources. And space is an issue for Hong Kong. We do not have the space and land for the recycling industry. So therefore, I think to do that now, Amy and others said that within the building, it's very, very difficult to find storage space to locate all these recycling facilities. So to achieve that, we need to have a long-term reliable collaboration with the mainland China. Up to now, still the border is still a barrier for cross-border transportation of waste. Okay. Now they have stopped the paper in China. That's one example. So if we can have make Hong Kong's waste management policy as a part of the Greater Bay Area's policy, that will really help a lot. And if we can have that, then Hong Kong can set up more concrete policy and strategies for Hong Kong, so that every actor in the chain can know what to do. Now, there's a lot of NGOs in Hong Kong now playing all these different roles of collecting waste and then doing some small scale recycling things. Now, I think that may work now, but not in the future. Now, if you see the government is now trying to centralize all these sorts of things, like glass and now paper, they're trying to do that. So therefore, it's very important that since we don't have the space inside the building, so a very, very efficient, systematic way of getting all this recycled waste from the building to the recycler is very, very critical thing to do. So so that is one thing that is missing, is the really collaboration with across the border. I do believe that we have the technical solutions. It's just the land, it's the culture, it's the value that a lot of speakers has talked about. And one thing also lacks is really the producers' responsibility program. Now we have the V system, but I will not consider that as a producer's responsibility program. It's more a producer's responsibility program, because the extra cost is really added to when you purchase the electrical appliances. So when we talk about producer's responsibility, we are talking about take-back system, responsible packaging, and all these sorts of things designed for disassemblies, use this sort of stuff. So I think that is something that is really missing as well. So that is my subject.
Okay. Thank you, Clare. If you want
I just want to say one thing about space. I think it's really about prioritization. In Hong Kong, we seem to have acres of space to spend buying things which become waste. So we've got tons of shopping malls that you go into the supermarket, the number of square feet that is spent selling drinks bottles compared to the number of square feet that's spent on a recycling machine for drinks bottles is kind of out of proportion. So I think it is really a prioritization thing. And everyone wants to push their thing to the other person. So when you talk to building designers, they want to push the waste transfer to the public realm. When you talk to the public realm designers, they want to push the waste management into the buildings. And I think we do need to stick to what's in our own boundaries. So the public streets, for example, in Hong Kong, the picture shown of was it New York with the pneumatic chutes. The streets are about 3 times wider, with about 1/10 of the number of people than in the urban areas. But that might be something that could be quite suitable for village areas or somewhere slightly less dense than central, for example.
Okay, thank you. Terry, I think it's great that you brought up different ideas, but 2 of those I think are really important and stands out to me. One is about the driver and the ambition. I think you pointed out very clearly that usually in Hong Kong we set a target that is achievable, rather than a target that is about right in terms of level of ambition for a city like Hong Kong. So I think that's one important aspect or important thing that we need to change in terms of the mindset and mentality and being brave to set aspirational targets. And secondly, about collaboration with others, whether it's with your stakeholders, but in your point, you talk about regional collaboration in the Greater Bay Area. So maybe we will save that for later on in the second part of the conversation, so that we can go deeper into how we can work with our neighbors. But maybe if I may now switch to Claire. Claire, thank you for staying up late. But because we're talking about drivers, and I'm curious, in New York City, or maybe in other cities that you've been working on, including Singapore, what are the main drivers behind all these zero waste mentality and approach? Is it because of the scale of the problem, or is it because of something else? Can you share your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, the drivers. I mean, in New York City and the Bay Area, it was city targets for zero waste that were partially the drivers, and then really facilities managers just highlighting where architects had not designed for them. I mean, we saw so many ridiculously designed spaces that it was impossible for people to manage the waste within. So I think once we had all our workshops, there was a real understanding that architects do have a true role to play. So I think the drivers were often the developers who owned their own buildings or city agencies. So we found that working with city agencies who realize it takes a lot of money to manage waste in their buildings, or developers who have seen that if they implement these strategies, they can have less waste and they can save hauling costs, save space. Because in fact, even though a baler or an organic waste dewaterer takes space, it takes up less space than the waste it's reduced the volume of. So I think developers were happily, they happily realized that once they'd implemented this, it actually made a lot of sense. And then they wanted to do it in other buildings. So I think it's kind of, once you get rolling on it and you have great projects that you can showcase for other people locally, and city governments and forward-thinking developers leading was really helpful wherever we've been working. Sorry, a little bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Now, maybe I'd like to report, we actually have, I think, close to 190 participants joining this webinar. So I think welcome everyone and welcome everyone, because I know it's not just from Hong Kong, but also from other regions like Singapore. I don't think we have anyone from Europe, but definitely within the Asia Pacific region, we have participants coming from different countries. Now, I've got quite a number of questions, so maybe let me take the first round of questions and I'll throw it to our speakers and panelists. Now, this one is for you, Claire. I think, let me see. This is from Calvin. He liked the zero waste guideline, which gives a holistic approach on waste management within buildings or even in the city planning. A quick question for you. I'm just wondering what's the adoption rate of various typologies, especially those with a tech equipment in it, as you mentioned in the guidelines. It seems it might be a challenge to install shops and even more advanced technology in buildings. So Claire, the adoption rate.
Okay, well, those typologies I showed of the different ways waste are managed in buildings was kind of like to categorize the existing buildings. So for the residential typologies, there were various ways the waste is managed in existing buildings, but only the 4, 5, and 6 are actually allowed by code. So there has been some kind of, I guess, developers have looked at the pros and cons of each. We didn't say one is better. Like, they all required to have equal convenience disposal. Some did it with more convenience to the residents. Some did it with less labor. And those were the trade-offs. So it wasn't really a case that we would ever consider installing a chute in an existing building that didn't have one. That would be too expensive. And even the pneumatics in New York City, we only have pneumatics in Roosevelt Island. I think it would we would never dig up our streets. It would just be too expensive and too difficult to coordinate. And that's why we were recommending that it only really made sense when there was existing linear overground infrastructure like a disused rail line. But in terms of adoption rate of things like using balers or using organic waste equipment, that has been definitely growing since the guidelines, and we have seen a lot of adoption of that kind of technology.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I have actually two questions from Nigel Metrobus. One of that is all these ideas from New York are applicable to Hong Kong. We have similar constraints. We can try if we really want to manage our waste properly. So this is more of a comment. But then there's another attendee commenting saying, I disagree that Hong Kong needs to find a unique solution, whereas in Taiwan nearby is a good model to emulate and localize. Now, I don't know, Fiona, are you familiar with the situation in Taiwan and what they are doing and whether there are things that we can learn from them? Maybe also I put this question to other panelists who've got some knowledge about what's going on in Taiwan. So maybe I'll start with Fiona here.
Sure. Well, I think that there's lots to learn from New York and Taiwan. So Taiwan had terrible problems with waste in the 80s, and that really forced them to think about what they were going to do. So some of the things that Hong Kong does try and emulate. So the municipal solid waste charging scheme. In the documentation about that, they're heavily referencing Taiwan and the reduction in waste that was made from that. I think the one issue here is that along with the charging, there was many other schemes and mechanisms that went into place in Taiwan to make it successful, such as having the equal convenience, like Claire mentioned, for New York City.
Yeah.
So in Hong Kong, normally the garbage is easy and the recycling is less easy. Composting, almost impossible. So there's things to learn from New York and from Taiwan, and there's things which we can apply to both of them. So I agree with the speakers that there'll be some small things which are unique to Hong Kong, but a lot of things have been learned elsewhere and we can draw from them. But with New York, as Claire showed earlier, it wasn't a perfect situation of waste management. There was all the garbage bins on the bag and all these kinds of things. So you have your problems and then you figure out how to solve them, and we can use as much as we can to learn from others in how to solve them. What we now need to do is do those things. So there's many examples out there, and we should be learning from those.
Okay, Kerry, do you agree?
Yes, I think definitely. I think there's generally a lot of solutions all over the world, and I think what Hong Kong is good at is really learning from all this and then try to localize this for Hong Kong. It's just like the B plus, like the Hong Kong B things. There are similar systems elsewhere. What we do every time as well, we look at others and then how we can this to Hong Kong. I think definitely this is what we should be doing.
Okay. Jackie, what do you think? Have you had projects like in Taiwan and other parts of the world that you think, oh, that's a good idea, and we should try to emulate here in Hong Kong?
Not in Taiwan so much. But again, I think it's really to create the incentive to do so. Like what Kerry said and what Fiona said, there's a lot of examples out there, and what's the incentive for the developer to, I guess, as an architect, would want to provide the product to the developer, and if they have this requirement for waste separation, waste collection, reducing waste, we as an architect will be very happy to provide that, to facilitate that. So really, if the incentive is there and become a policy, and then we can implement the guideline to make this happen.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Amy and MK, maybe I'll start with Amy. With Swire Properties portfolio, not just in Hong Kong, but elsewhere, have you actually learned anything from your colleagues, say in China or in other cities?
Yes, I think I agree that waste management discussion should really begin in the building design stage, and I echo a lot with the a lot of speakers that if we could take waste management as a material flow instead of afterthoughts, it will be really better coordinated at the building and tenancy design stage. So I think for our development project, we need to get buy-in from the architects and also the professionals, building professionals along the whole life cycle. And also, we are also helping our tenants in their tenant fit out. We proactively engage our tenants and designers and contractors so that they will reserve space for waste separation. I think, I think, for example, in Hong Kong, I think one of the pain points for us is, the building regulations for refuse room, for example, the minimum space requirement is like a total usable floor space in meter square developed by 925. Like, take an example of a 40, more than 40 story buildings, the only approximately like 800 square feet of space is required, is stipulated. So I think if with the nowadays the smart waste technology emerges and higher standards of hygiene and cleaning and professionalism required for cleaning contractors, and hardware and space would be needed for hardware installation and workspace. And I think we would also welcome the government and building development to review guidelines and standards around refuse room design. So we can also mobilize or give more flexibility or room for taking waste management and material flow discussion and planning at the really early design stage. Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. MK, you're smiling and nodding. So can you share with us what's your thoughts? Please unmute your mic.
I totally agree that some of our regulations are quite dated, and they are in fact the products of probably some 30, 40 years. Some got updated, some don't. In particular on some of the, for example, what Amy mentions, refuse rooms, we need to look at that. And for Beam Plus, I think we are already encouraging larger and more reasonable facilities, and in order for level playing field, regulations do play a part, and I think on the incentive side, since Beam Plus now is related to the gross floor area concessions. Also, we would like to improve the systems. One thing which I think we are doing good, probably I hope to see some improvement, is we have put a stronger emphasis on material and waste management. And in order to get a high rating, you need to also do good, at least of a certain percentage in the next version of Beam Plus. So this is quite encouraging to designers and developers, I guess. And I think I would like to go back to the point on values. I think we do need to come up with systems rather than looking too much on regulations. Good regulation is good, but we need something which promote behavior and something which introduce intrinsic values on waste management.
Thank you, MK. I think that's very important. You talk about value, but you also mentioned regulation, which is what I would like to follow up on right now. We have a question from Patrick, asking about how should the current building regulations of Hong Kong or green building schemes requirements be enhanced to facilitate the provision of space for waste facilities, installation, or to drive building occupants' behavior. Now, I would like to start with Carrie. With your work at Hong Kong Green Building Council, and also your knowledge about how to work with the government in terms of regulation requirements and standards, and then how to also work with industry stakeholders, how to help them to enable them to do better. So I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this one.
No, I think I agree with what Jackie said. It is the value. Now, involve a lot of extra costs in terms of space, in terms of equipment costs, this sort of things. The thing is that developers should not just look at the cost, but look at the cost of not doing that in the long term. Well, because in the long term, I think the polluters pay will be you're getting in, and there's no way we can get away with that. So if we can work out this value of not doing that, and then put it to the front, and then let the developer share part of those costs, I think that will be one way to do it, because value, shapes our culture. So that is one thing that that we should be, the government should be looking at. The GFA concession, MK has just talked about it. The government is now reviewing the GFA concession, linking part of it to, well, the rating of the plus. So that is one thing I had. So, so one thing that we can do as well, maybe within 3 years, 4 years, that we can continue this stringent the requirements on that. And also nothing can stop the government by putting extra GFAs for prescribe the list of requirements. Regarding the tenants, I think what the landlords can do is to have some incentive to the tenants. That's one thing that we can do. The other thing is, it is more stringent, is to put into the land lease, put into the DMCs, per minute, that the building owners need to have a management plan to save a certain reduction a year. So I think that will also help the developers in managing the tenants as well. So these are some of my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Fiona, what do you think? I mean, you've been working with a lot of clients, so probably you understand their challenges, but also opportunities with which they can, improve performance in terms of, building design, and also, of course, to reduce the creation of waste and to manage better in terms of waste collection and recycling. How can we do it through regulation, or maybe better training? We talk about education and raising awareness at the beginning of this conversation. So any insights from your clients, actually, what are they asking for?
Sure. Well, some clients are asking for things along those lines. Some are being encouraged to think about them by our team. So, as has been mentioned before, space is always helpful, and as somebody said, that we need to think about the space that's being used by not doing the implementation. So, for example, using the street as the pile for the garbage bins as opposed to putting a compactor in, or using a huge amount of space for cardboard as opposed to using a baler. So quite often there are trade-offs like that, and there's compact or easy to use technologies now which can be applied for that. And I think in terms of our clients, it varies a little with if it's a campus type organisation, such as a hospital or a university, then there's a lot of things that can be done there which are less easy than in a residential, for example. But with the residential, we're really trying to encourage to allow for the ability to separate food waste, including some of the come in, come out drop-off schemes is one option that's worked quite well in Park Island. That was not to do with us, but I know that that's an operating facility that was the highest performing in the challenge.
Okay. Thank you. Claire, I'd like to ask you a related question. So in your research, with New York City and then Singapore, how important can you see regulations or industry standards as an enabler to to change behavior, to create opportunities, and overall to improve waste collection and separation and recycling?
Definitely big enabler. I mean, just looking in the Bay Area, they have new regulations that they're calling methane a short-term pollutant. So every area in the Bay Area now has to separate a certain amount of food waste, and that, you know, that trickles on down. So there's definitely a lot more forward thinking things going on there because of the policies that are pushing it. And the same in New York City. Now large food waste generators have to separate organic waste. It's expensive to haul organic waste, so they're putting in equipment to, I mean, it's 90% water. If you just dewater it, that's a tiny piece of equipment. It stops it smelling, it reduces the volume massively. I think the regulations really help, especially when it's not that hard to do in any case, and it's a win-win for the business and the developer as well. And also regulations in the Bay Area about reusable plates. You're no longer allowed to dine in some areas on disposable plates. And that's a real design issue because you can't add dishwashers after the fact very easily in a big building. So really designing for reusable dishware. If you have the regulation, the architects design for it really makes a difference.
And what about Singapore? In your research, have you also looked into their regulatory framework or you know, the way they are going into?
Singapore has this new zero waste plan, and there are a couple of things, like in the large new developments, they are actually requiring pneumatics for trash and recycling, and some of them over 500 units. They are also requiring food waste space be provided for food waste equipment in some of the larger food waste generators. But that's a little difficult because it's more than just space, because some stuff sends food waste down the drain, which isn't that great. Whereas, and it's a different type of space than if you're dewatering it and having it collected. So they have some regulations that help, but they're not necessarily fully thought through from the design point.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Now I have a couple of questions about some policy instruments. Obviously, in Hong Kong, we've been talking about the municipal waste, MSW, municipal solid waste charging scheme. We have another question actually telling us that in the UK, a virgin plastics tax is being introduced. That will make packaging made of virgin plastic more expensive. And the question is, will Hong Kong be considering this policy instrument? So because this will create actually demand for recycled plastics. What's your thoughts? I'm looking around, see if any panels yeah? Yeah, please.
Okay, yes, that is right. The plastic packaging is there, and also the EU has a circular economy package, which will be implemented over the period of the next few years. We'll be looking at 3 different ways to deal with plastic. So the ones which are easy to replace with other materials should be replaced. The ones that could be recycled should be focused on better recycling, and the ones which can't be avoided at the moment should be better looked after and able to handle. So that's part of the zero waste package with the EU. And there's also going to be a requirement there that about 50% of plastic packaging needs to be from recycled materials, and that's really increasing the value of recycled plastics to the extent that the plastics that's been collected in Hong Kong in anticipation of the opening of the New Life Plastics, which I'm sure Nigel could comment on, was actually being sent to Europe for processing, because there is now a demand for the recycled plastic. So as well as the tax, if there's just a tax on its own, it can just become another cost. But if there's also then that policy regulation to require the use of recycled plastic, then that really provides a market for the recycled plastic to then use. So in my opinion, Hong Kong shouldn't invent its own policy. They could potentially choose to either follow one that's either with the EU, so we follow the EU standard, or something else within Asia. But Hong Kong as a market on its own is too small to invent its own different standards to everyone else.
Okay, okay. Yeah, and Amy, I just wonder whether these type of new policies would affect, say, your operation, considering, you know, people's changing behavior, and whether you think that's an advantage, or whether that's actually, you know, making your life more difficult.
Right. Thank you, Simon. I think, you know, having a policy or a level playing field for all the market players is important. But equally important, I think plastic sometimes is also a confusing topic for the general public. We need to engage the community members, everybody in the city to really move forward for managing this or putting circularity into their mindsets. And sometimes plastic, I think for us, when we communicate with our building users, our tenants, we also create like one-pagers, posters, and tips, because we also find that we need to help our customers to understand the different plastic and the recyclability, and also which one can be recycled, how to do recycling. And I think if we introduce any similar programs or policy, it would be better that the general public be clearly educated, and so they will understand the differences between different options. And I think that will help to get the buy-in from the public. And like, for example, we are also, putting the principle of circularity into practice in our building design. For a new building, we are, setting specification for procurement of, low carbon concretes and, steel and rebar and structural steel with recycled content. That is, we would like to encourage the, sustainable procurement. And we are also piloting a smart reusable cups, Hong Kong's first kind of smart cups networking system in Hong Kong. So we would like to encourage, our coffee drinkers to come and just test out this technology and concept of reusable and cups in Hong Kong. So this is something that we are testing out, and I think we welcome, circularity, and also putting different policies and or education help for for helping the society to transition to a more circular economy.
Thank you, Amy. Now I'm checking the time. We still have just more than 10 minutes for this discussion. Now I have been receiving lots of questions, so please excuse me if I cannot share your questions, because I don't think we have enough time to go through all the questions, but I can assure you that we will share your questions to our panelists and speakers and see if they will, give us a reply, and then we'll try to contact you and send it back to you. Now, I would like to focus on a few things before we close. One is, going back to our focus today is about building. So in terms of building materials, the structure of the building and foundation, and how we can facilitate the materialization of the buildings, I would like to spend a few minutes to talk about that. So maybe if I may ask NK and also Jackie, in terms of your work, when you start planning with developers and these particular topics, how would you encourage them to think about, okay, shall we choose this particular material over the other for this reasons? And any insights or experience that you would like to share, so that for the other developers or architects, we will follow that best practices, so to speak. So maybe MK, may I start with you?
Right. I think some of the considerations are getting mainstream. We do have our internal checking to ask a few questions, some basic question. Can the construction be be more simpler? Can the multi-layer construction elements be having any alternatives? How can we consider better durability to extend the surface life of certain materials? And if we can optimize space, can we think of reducing the number of repetitive use and combine them in a more effective program? I think these are some of the questions we ask. And in terms of materials and waste management, I think the DFMA is something, well, Hong Kong needs to look at it and be more skillful. I think we have a lot to learn from UK or other countries that they have quite a developed in fact, Singapore, DFMA guidelines and skill sets, and they have a lot of workshops. Practitioners actually get quite a good understanding and a good connections with the vendors and the manufacturers, fabricators. I think these can all help. Well,
thank you, MK. Jackie, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so if you know the work of our firm, KPF, we use a lot of glass, a lot of metal. We use very durable material, but somehow glass is so durable that when it comes to the end of life, the glass is heat strengthened, is treated. It's in a way, I'm not sure how recyclable it is. So we do try to explore new materials that can be used on exterior enclosure. Like recently, a lot of projects we started using terracotta, natural, also durable material. So I think as an architect, we can start to explore more material that is unconventional but natural, but also sustainable.
Okay. Thank you, Jackie. And Amy, from the developer's perspective, do you think you have a role to play actually to look into those areas, to maybe even insist you want the building design and in terms of material use, you are asking for this and that. Is it a way internally, to try to create that mentality and agreement, and then externally work with the other stakeholders to make it happen?
Yes, thanks. So I think, we also have adopted, several measures that is quite aligned with the zero waste design guidelines. So for example, in our new building design, so we also make use of, like third-party audit, waste audit and study to anticipate what kind of, waste will be generated and how we could design the space, and also allow dedicated space for storing and handling waste and also recyclables. And also, like I just mentioned, in our specification, we also specify building materials that are contain recycled content such as PFA and also recycled steel. Those are the key major construction materials. And we also during the operation phase, we have sustainable development fit-out guideline to offer to our tenants, so they can, when they do their renovation or fit-out, they can take reference. And also we customizing it for the food and beverages outlets. We also have a green kitchen technical guidelines. So we hope that, when they do the design and operations, and also procurement, they will also have some reference to take, and to reduce their waste and energy and water consumption in the design and also operations. And I think this is some examples that we are working on, and continuously we are also sourcing smart technologies to help our tenants to understand their waste generation, daily waste generation level, and how we can engage not just a tenant representatives, but also the tenants population, their employees together to work on recyclables, or putting circularity into their agenda. I think we really welcome this zero design guideline, but I think we would need to have more education along the whole value chain, the designer, contractors, suppliers, tenants, customers, and building management teams, and even downstream recyclers. And if we can become, if this become more popular, it will be able to influence the whole real estate industry in the building development cycle. And also, I think government could really set a good example if they could support and mandate or even encourage the adoption of zero waste design guideline in their new government building, which could serve as an opportunity to inspire innovations from architects and also designers. And of course, like I think mentioned, if as smart technologies emerges and extra hardware may need to be hosted inside the refuge room and may require more space, and if the government could also review the current specification to ensure that it could accommodate the actual waste management needs of different types of buildings, that would be also helpful. Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. Carrie, do you think Hong Kong GBC, as well as other associations and platforms that you are working closely with, are ideal platforms actually to promote this zero waste design ideas?
Yes, definitely. I think BIM Plus is really one of our tools. But another point that I would like to make is that what we can do is really to go with the investors. Now, if investors, the good thing is that they are now getting more and more concerned about the environmental risk of their investment portfolio. So if we can get this issue, directly go to the investors to say, well, this is really a huge environmental risk, so that they will be making the decisions on what to invest. And say, for instance, like buildings, especially those that is more favorable with the REITs. The investors to REITs will look at the environmental performance of that building. So I think this is a good news, and I think this is something that the GBC and the other NGOs can do.
Well, actually, Carrie, this is a great point because Professor Johnny Chan also asked a similar question. He asked, what would be the role of the financial institution? So maybe can I ask also Fiona, what do you think? And maybe also Claire, after Fiona, what's the situation in New York City? How important are investors in this particular conversation? So maybe I'll start with Fiona first.
Sure. Well, I think investors, along with everybody else, has some kind of role to play. I think sometimes the influence is overplayed, and then maybe not as high priority as things like regulators and designers themselves. But there is an importance to play that if you're investing your money in, if you have enough money to invest in somewhere, you can then influence what you're buying and what you're investing in. So there is some role there. But I think we shouldn't leave everything to the investors in the market, because there's often other drivers towards market investors, such as the profitability and so on, which might be a higher driver than particularly waste, for example. I know that carbon is becoming more aware and more popular, but I think waste is still not down there. And often with the investing or the ESG guidelines, they're kind of mixing together all sorts of different things which don't really match, such as, what's your gender diversity, what's your transparency, plus what's your carbon, plus what's your waste, and they're kind of mixing and matching different things that might not compare together. So while there is a role to play, I think we should just be nervous about over prioritizing.
Right. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Fiona. Claire, what about in New York City? The role of finance?
I have to admit that I haven't been very aware of a role of finance in what's happened to date in New York City. I mean, there's, in terms of building materials and making sure you're investing in a good quality building, I would say, as Fiona said, there's definitely some role, but we hear more about investing in an energy efficient building rather than one that is more circular. I think another driver is really kind of how businesses want to seem to the public. Like, I've been doing some work with Google, and their driver is really just being seen as a leader, and plastics, everybody's so against them that there's a kind of desire to not have single-use plastics in your buildings, like in San Francisco airport as well. I think it's a common sentiment is driving companies as well.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Now, I think we are about time, but I've saved this question till the last, because I think this is a good question. And I pose this question to everyone who would like to give a response. How do you design a building system today for different scenarios in, say, 10 years from now? so that it remains flexible for changing materials that are collected. So, it's about the challenges now, but also thinking about what's next in the next 10 years. I think this is brilliant to close our discussion today. So who would like to give the first step? Maybe Jackie?
How do you design a building in 10 years?
Design now, but being flexible enough for the next 10 years as you encounter new challenges in terms of materials that you're collecting.
Yeah, well, this is a really big question.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the material you collected, like waste, doesn't stay in the building. So you have to design a building for the waste to exit the building, to find a second life, or maybe approaching into the dumpster. So maybe this is going back to the original of this panel discussion or the webinar, which is how to design a building that facilitate this waste collection, movement of waste, to do it efficiently. So yeah, to me, I don't think the waste actually should stay in the building. If it actually stays, that's not a good thing. Which I think we have seen maybe some of these examples in Hong Kong.
Right. Okay, thank you, Jackie. MK, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think we can learn from experience, even though if we are looking forward, there are certain patterns that we can learn previously on different, or how we, on the volumes, on the weight, on the type of the materials we need to manage in the buildings. On the other hand, we need, as building designer, I think we need to look at something which how to integrate with smart systems that are programmable, that and how that could be integrated in the buildings. And last but not the least, I think again, building behavior is the key. If we can come up with a building design that can engage users, and I think, and if it is programmable, then, I think we have more or less the answer.
Okay, Harry and Fiona, do you have anything to add?
I agree totally that, it's not the building that creates those waste, it's the people that create waste.
Yeah.
Whether those waste can be recycled, it really depends on the other end, which is the recycling industry and also the users. But one thing I think we should design our waste is to make the building as flexible as possible. We have flexible speaker system, we have structural cables that can adopt the change in the building layout. We can have gypsum boards that can use the particles. I think this is what the building industry should be focusing on.
Thank you. Fiona?
Yeah, and I'd say flexibility is the key as well, and space for containers. So ultimately, between the thing that you use and it getting taken away, it needs to go in a container of some kind, generally a bin or something. So space to put those is quite important. So with the tiny waste rooms, you can only fit one bin in, so that means you might be able to put mixed recyclables, but it's difficult to add food waste or different types of packaging, or to separate into different materials.
Yeah.
So I went to one 10-tower building recently to help with the community composting, opening a new bin. And they had a kind of a corridor area right where everybody was walking back and forth. And they got 6 glass bins, so they must only have been there within 2 years. They now have their food waste community composting bin that we were opening, and then they have a single tiny little one for plastic paper and recycling. So the proportion wasn't right, but the space there meant that you could put different types of containers in it, and it was easy for the product to use. And I think we also need to have things which are accessible. So quite often the place to dispose something is down in the basement, or it's not very easy to access. So if it can be within a flexible space in a community area, then that helps from the user side.
Thank you. And Amy?
Yeah, I think all the panelists also gave really good, examples and answers. And I would just like to add a little bit is, we can have a more integrated design approach for, for looking ahead and, including the building users and also the design team and and the contractors and also set ambitious targets. I think, once we have a long-term target on, and also with the help of current technologies, simulations and optimization, I think, it is an exciting opportunity, and I think it is feasible to have such a building to be designed and developed.
Thank you, Amy. And Claire, last but not least, you have the final word. So what do you say?
I really agree with what Fiona said about having flexible central spaces will allow you to change things in the future. I mean, that building I had shown that started me doing the design guidelines had a chute for trash, another one for metal, glass and plastic, and another one for paper. And the city's thinking, oh, it wants to collect organics. What can you do? You can't add another chute. So that kind of system where you have very purpose-built passageways is more difficult. But I have actually seen buildings do multi-purpose chutes where if you have a few bins beside them, the building staff could use the chute for different streams. So there's flexibility there. So really thinking that the collection might change and making sure you design in some level of flexibility, which will take less space if it's more centralized.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Now, with that, I would like to thank our speakers and panelists once again. So thank you, Claire, and thank you all our panelists joining us either at DEC or from online. And thank you all the audience for being part of this important conversation. Now at DEC, we are commissioning projects related to zero waste design in the coming months. And if you're interested, by all means, please contact us, and we would like to have you as part of the collaboration. So with that, thank you again for joining us today. I can see we still have 160 people staying till the very end, which kind of tell us, how important this topic is. So thank you so much. Have a nice day, and hope to see you again in our next BC event. Thank you, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.